How are you doing, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about 5 running backs for Week 10 fantasy football that I'm very confident in for lineups here in this week's games. These are players that I'm starting in essentially all formats here. All of these players have made my top 20 running back rankings for this week, and I think have incredibly good matchups for this week's games. Game scripts as well are parts that'll factor in here and make these very, very strong lineup plays for Week 10. So, as always, if you're new around here, the comment section is always open down below. If you have lineup questions for me, drop that stuff on down there. And in the description of today's episode, we also have a Discord community that you can join and take advantage of as well. So thanks so much for diving into today's episode with me, you guys. Let's get started. Somehow I didn't make it there with my words in the intro, but of course, those of you new around here, please click that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. We're trying to grow this SFS community here and help out as many fantasy football players as we possibly can this season and have a lot of fun while finishing out our leagues for this year. So, as always, what I do to start off these episodes every week is I break down my picks from the last game, where we went right, where we went wrong. Of course, there's always explanations for both. So, we were correct. 3 of the 5 picks that we made in the starts category. That's what we do every week here. Jamaal Williams crossed the threshold for us despite surprisingly not finding his way into a goal line vulturing situation. Miles Sanders was correct for us. And then the Atlanta backfield. Tyler Algier, despite CPAT coming back into the game, was able to go out there and have 99 yards rushing, which was rather surprising. CPAT, of course, was absolutely phenomenal in that contest, who we're going to talk about here to kick off today's episode. And then our 2 misses of the week, Raheem Mostert, who, when putting this in closer to the end of the week, I had my skepticisms and wish I could go back on it. I've actually made a couple of amendments through the community section on the YouTube channel, so always keep your eye out for those. All the more reason to have the bell on so you can just get that quick pop-up notification. But towards game time, I was starting to feel a little bit nervous about Jeff Wilson Jr., and then lo and behold, Jeff Wilson actually outsnapped Raheem Mostert in his first game as a Miami Dolphin. And then our flat-out just bad miss this week was Deontay Foreman against Cincinnati. I thought some of the defensive injuries for Cincy would play a crucial and pivotal part in this game. They didn't. Joe Mixon, man, was he the must-start running back of the week, the highest scorer in fantasy. I believe he was the 8th highest score all time for a fantasy football player. So just a little bit of info about Week 9. So let's dive on in to Week 10. I am definitely risking my reputation here, if you will, jokingly, of course, but actually kind of a little bit. We're putting 2 players in the Thursday night slate in our must-starts episode this week, so stay tuned for the other player and the other video if you want to go check that out after you watch this one on the channel, of course. But Cordarrelle Patterson, things could go very wrong here if you guys are watching this Friday, Saturday, heck, maybe you're watching this Sunday morning just before games begin and you're looking for some last-minute lineup advice. But Cordarrelle Patterson is a player that I have a lot of trust in for this week after seeing what he did in his Week 9 return off of the injured reserve, of course, dealing with a knee injury that's held him out for the last 4 weeks. So for this week, as it relates to CPAT, he's my running back 16. So, of course, that means we're starting him as an RB2 and even 8-man format. So extreme confidence in what CPAT can be for lineups this week. He erupted in his first game back here against the Los Angeles Chargers, a very favorable matchup for opposing fantasy running backs, and Cordarrelle had 2 rushing touchdowns. He actually had a 3rd rushing touchdown, which I forget if that was on a drive where he ended up capping it off with a score regardless. But it was a 30-plus yard rip off the left sideline, and it got called back to an offensive hold. It was a great run. He flashed his explosiveness, athleticism, and overall speed. So it was really great to see that stuff. Additionally, he did have a decent amount of work. He had 14 touches in the game. However, just a 39% snap share in Week 9. So the fact that he was getting that work, being that productive with that work, able to find the end zone and be used in the goal line and goal-to-go situations, very, very encouraging stuff. So the context that we have here for this Week 10 matchup at Carolina is the fact that this is the first matchup CMC's had against this team this year. The last time we saw them was Week 8. That was Tyler Algier getting the nod in that game. Crazy one. That was where PJ Walker had the Hail Mary to essentially win the game, but then who was the kicker? Was it Eddie Pinheiro that missed the PAT, and then he also missed the overtime kick? Crazy stuff there. Falcons walked out of that victorious and in first place in the South. But back to CPAT here, what we're actually talking through for Fantasy Football Week 10. So for this game, the Panthers are coming off of a matchup. This is a short week, by the way, of course. Keep that into consideration here. A Thursday night contest where they just got their brakes blown off of on Sunday afternoon by an opposing rushing defense, or offense, and Joe Mixon, who had 5 total touchdowns, 4 rushing and 1 receiving. And this team has to be banged up. Like, there has to be some level of fatigue. And I was actually just talking to one of our gold members in the SFS community Discord about some just scenarios for his team this week. There is a great opportunity for Atlanta, which is a run-first offense, about as extreme as it gets in today's day and age in the NFL, with the rushing offense that their quarterback provides, as well as what their run game on the ground with their actual running backs presents. They can walk in here and get a team that's kind of down bad right now and continue to just be physical and beat them up. So if Arthur Smith strategically, which I strongly believe he should, implements a rushing game and just brings physicality to the table in this matchup, things could get very bad very quickly for Carolina's defense yet again, and CPAT could maybe even finish in the top 12 this week. So loving this start here. CPAT is in a matchup as well where Carolina, over the greater, broad scope of this season for the Carolina defense here, they're allowing running backs to typically score more than their average points scored throughout their broader, sample size this season. So for CPAT, who's averaging 14.3 points per game this year, you can, kind of pencil in and chart him to exceed those expectations here this week. He had 17.8 points on, again, that 39% snap count percentage in week 9. D'Onta Foreman really doubling down here on this game. So despite the fact that I do think there are some concerns for the Carolina Panthers coming into this game, I think a large majority of that lies on the defensive side of the ball. Now, that might be kind of surprising after seeing just how awful this offense was in the first half. PJ Walker ended up getting benched. Baker Mayfield came in and scored 21 points. It was brutal. It was pretty much the Carolina Panthers bloodbath. Their their mascot in his slogan or whatever is keep pounding. Like last week, the Bengals kept pounding, and they just absolutely took this team to a different level of rock bottom than I thought they were capable of seeing. But this week, offensively, a divisional matchup. I'm expecting them to come back here and bounce back as much as you can expect this Carolina team to. I don't think they're going to get whitewashed again this game. I do think they're able to come out here and put up a respectable fight, scrap and claw their way through this game. After all, that's what they did back in week 8, and they were able to put up a respectable performance. So the one key X factor in this game is going to be the health of Chuba Hubbard. It seems like, I'm recording this Wednesday evening, it seems like he's going to be active and available to play here for the first time in 3 weeks, or this will be the 3rd week. So it is a short week. That, of course, does raise the question mark of how much utility he'll have, and I do think that's something important to ask, because I do wonder if he'll truly be on full display in this game. So what I do know about D'Onta Foreman is that we have seen him in these last 2 out of 3 games be incredibly effective, with Chuba in one game, without him in the other. And then, of course, that Cincinnati beatdown was the one game where he really missed. So, again, he was stuffed last week. As a result of the negative game script for a guy who's not a phenomenal pass catcher, he was limited to just 43% of the offensive snap count percentage. And this is a guy who, as well, in those 2 weeks prior to week 9, with and without Chuba Hubbard, had a 15.5 point performance in back-to-back contests. So he's shown us some really nice things here. This is a game where I expect them, again, to be competitive. And this is a team that, if you look at Foreman and what he's been able to produce since the Christian McCaffrey trade, this offense has really leaned into him as their offensive identity, running the football, playing physical. He has averaged 16.8 points since they moved on from CMC. So if you look at this Atlanta matchup, another team that has allowed running backs to exceed typically their expectations for points on a weekly basis and their average points scored per game this season, D'Onta Foreman's positioned in a situation to go out here and do that again in this matchup. Now, his numbers are going to be a little bit skewed because he was, of course, serving a backup role throughout the majority of the season, but that's why we took those numbers from the games without Christian McCaffrey. Tony Pollard here. Actually, one last note on D'Onta Foreman. He is our RB18 for this week. Tony Pollard at Green Bay this week is 100% a must start for me. I have Pollard as my running back 13. Kind of risky business having him so high on the rankings for this week's games. The reason I'm on tossing the rankings out here for you guys this week. A, it's a nice marker, but B, the tiers aren't going to come out in time for Thursday Night Football. I'm assuming I'm going to end up dropping those on Friday morning. Unfortunately, it's going to suck because you're going to have, 2 to 3 guys on each tiers list who has already played, and I'll try and adjust that appropriately to where I expect them to finish throughout the week. But these essentially give you some light into my pre-Thursday night tiers and rankings for this week's games. At the end of the day, what it came down to is I just didn't have enough time to record those episodes, and those take a while to prep. So, of course, ranking 30 guys and taking notes on 30 players for 2 separate videos is a bit of work. So I love that video, though. It's actually probably my favorite one to make every week. So really looking forward to having that tiers. This video actually got bumped back is the reason why that's not coming out in time. But Tony Pollard at Green Bay here. So there's a couple of important metrics and things to consider in this game. However, the first is Zeke's health. I think that Ezekiel Elliott's health will put Tony in a position to be a must-start player this week, and the reasoning for that is because he's questionable heading in. Jerry says he has a chance to play, this being Jerry Jones, of course, Coach Jerry Jones. He's the owner, but the de facto coach, because we all know who's calling the shots there. And I think that even if Ezekiel Elliott plays, which I would be somewhat surprised to see, but also not, I think he will be on a pitch count. I think that his opportunities will be limited, and I don't think that he is going to be the guy that's going to carry this offensive attack on the ground this week. So if you've been watching Green Bay Packers football, which I absolutely have been so far this season, they have been brutal against the run in various stretches. And what they really struggle against is not physical, bulldozer running backs like Ezekiel Elliott. It's flash and dash explosive guys like Tony Pollard. And this is something that gives me a great deal of scare heading into this game. Tony's had really great fantasy performances in the past, yet he's never had more than 14 rushing attempts in a game in his pro career. So we know that he's exceptionally efficient. He's going to come out here and do very nice things. This Dallas offensive line has exceeded expectations and in a better unit than we expected, despite the losses in free agency, despite injuries to guys like Tyron Smith. They've just been good this year. And I think that you look at some of the injuries that accumulated for the Green Bay defensive side of the ball, from your Rashawn Garys being out for the season with a torn ACL, missing guys in the secondary. I would be surprised to see Dallas not have their way with this defensive unit. And again, this is our third straight matchup this week for a defensive unit that is allowing fantasy running backs to exceed their weekly average in points scored this season. Tony Pollard has the opportunity to come out here this week and do that. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity for a guy who could potentially see a career high in touches this week if things break his way and ultimately go the direction that they inevitably could go based on, again, Ezekiel Elliott's health for this week's games. Jamaal Williams, our fourth must-start player for this week. He is our RB17 here, so hovering around the, kind of end of the spectrum. So if you're in an 8-man league, maybe you're not playing and maybe you're your flex, somewhere in between there potentially in terms of his overall usage. I am starting Jamaal in almost all 10 and 12-man plus league formats, though. In those situations where your depth is thinned out a little bit more and you don't have as many options, look at the running back pool for this week. This is another week in back-to-back situations where I've looked at the depth in my rankings and I'm like, holy crap, this is a kind of time here where you're looking at multiple running backs in a single backfield being in the top 24, which is always a bit concerning and obviously raises question marks about the viability of teams, fantasy teams this is, for the rest of the season. This is where that depth gets real thin. Bye week season is absolutely brutal for running back owners in fantasy football. So Jamaal Williams, again, my running back 17 this week. As I said, he's more of a flex play in those shallower formats. Chances are you have a better receiver, though. In those 10, 12-plus man formats, though, we're definitely looking to Jamaal as a running back 2 for this week. So this week, Jamaal is at Chicago. This is a matchup where, for the first time in today's episode, you've heard me referencing defenses of basically their ability to prevent a running back from scoring their average in fantasy or allowing them to exceed that marker. Of course, we're not talking about defenses that are allowing running backs to not get there or that are not allowing opposing running backs to reach their point average per game this season. Jamaal is the first name on the list with a somewhat difficult matchup. This is going to be kind of a middle-of-the-pack matchup where Chicago is pretty much letting running backs reach their weekly average for this season, which, if you're wondering, for Jamaal Williams in half PPR right now is about 13.3 points per game. So why do we like Jamaal in this matchup? It's a very similar situation to last week. DeAndre Swift's coming off of a season-low 16% snap count percentage. That, of course, is an attribute to his health. the reason that he's not the starter right now and seeing the bulk of the opportunities in both the rushing and receiving phase of the game is because that ankle and shoulder continue to be the most annoying injuries in fantasy football this season. It's like the guy, it's like you're a little kid and there's cookies on the top shelf of the cupboard and you can't reach them. And for DeAndre Swift, whatever it is, he just can't seem to reach 100% health. However, he is continually kind of teasing us on the field, making plays, every once in a while catching a receiving touchdown, but he's not, fulfilling that top 5 to 7 running back projection that, his high upside could have reached in PPR formats and draft season this year. So for Jamaal, again, he's coming off of a season high. I don't remember if I said this or not. I did touch on the DeAndre Swift snap count percentage, but for Jamaal Williams, it is a season high for him versus a season low for DeAndre Swift. Jamaal Williams reached a 61%, again, season high snap count percentage in this last week's game. So the most amount of playing time in terms of overall opportunities to see the field based on the piece of the pie he's getting of the overall offensive snaps. So you like to see that for Jamaal's sake here. Hopefully those of you guys that are DeAndre Swift owners have had the ability to acquire Jamaal via trade. Time's running out if you haven't done that yet. Trade deadlines for leagues are approaching at various speeds and rates here, depending on your league settings and whatnot. But if you haven't done so already, might not be a bad idea at this point for Swift owners. I'd be surprised if you haven't at least tried so far. But I like this matchup. You assume the opportunities are going to be there. Every single week he's a threat to be a touchdown vulture regardless. And I do think this is a game where you get two teams that are kind of the bottom feeders in the NFC North, despite the fact that really the Packers have joined them in this class here. It's kind of the Vikings division for 2022. But overall, this Lions team is definitely not an air raid offense. They're going to play a balanced style of football, and they're going to get Jamaal involved in both phases. So feeling comfortable and confident in him. I don't think his ceiling is nearly as high as the other three players we've covered today, but I do think his floor is pretty solid for this week's matchup. Last up here, let's dive into one of my shallower picks for this week, but I did really want to cover Leonard Fournette here because his stock has been trending down for some time. We've had him as a frequent buy low candidate here and struggled yet again in week 9. He wasn't fantastic. That Rams defensive unit was very stout. So I wanted to cover him here. Here's my running back 14 for this week, so our second highest ranked player in the start-sit segment for Week 10 fantasy. Remember, Tony Pollard was our running back 13, the third name that we covered in this episode. So essentially, if you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about in regards to stock dropping, first and foremost, this Tampa rushing offense has been absolutely atrocious this season. If you haven't seen it so far, cut on the tape. I'm sure there'll be some negative highlights this week's matchup that I'm having him as a start candidate against Seattle. There are times when there is literally absolutely nowhere to run, and Leonard Fournette looks, if we're being honest, a bit unexplosive and under-athletic as compared to his counterpart Rachaad White, which is the second part of kind of the negative stock circumstances, if you will, in terms of viewing fantasy players as stocks and bonds, trading assets and whatnot. I'm sure the majority of you guys are familiar with that. But anyways, Leonard Fournette here, there was a rumor that I first saw reported via Sleeper Fantasy. It was actually a beat report from a Tampa Bay Buccaneer media member that it predicted or expects Rachaad White to take over this backfield and become the team's starter. Now, I can see why there's merit to that take. I personally am not taking that stance right now. I'm not going to buy into that too much here. I'm especially not doing that here for Week 10. I still have a great deal of confidence in Leonard Fournette for this matchup, and I think the Seattle Seahawks have their hands full with this Tampa offense this week, despite the fact that they've been underproducing, inefficient, and just overall bad for the 2022 season. So to kind of put that speculation and amount of rumors behind us going forward here, at least for this week's games, again, we can certainly address that again in future weeks here. But for Week 10, I do think that against Seattle, which is, again, one of those matchups that have allowed fantasy running backs to exceed their weekly average this season, Fournette is primed for a nice game. Additionally, here, this goes beyond the analytics, and this kind of goes into some football psychology or just overall productiveness and of human beings in general. But Seattle has the farthest travel in NFL history this week, traveling from Seattle, Washington to Munich, Germany to play this international contest that will be held, of course, in Munich, Germany. They've got themselves an absolute hike. I'd be a fool not to expect some jet lag for Seattle and a little bit of sloppy, uncharacteristic play of this team that has shocked the world so far this season. So does that have a direct correlation to the run-stopping defense of the Seattle Seahawks? No, I don't think it does. But I do think that there is a time and place where when football games get sloppy, when stuff just isn't working, turn around, hand the football off, play physical, and get the job done at the end of the day. So again, this is a below average Seattle defense that's allowing a above average amount of points to opposing fantasy running backs, if that makes sense. So they are bad at stopping opposing fantasy running backs. I think that this Tampa Bay offense can do enough to get Leonard Fournette across the double-digit threshold in terms of overall points scored this week. Does he have the highest ceiling of anyone on the list for today's video? No, he certainly doesn't, but I do think that his floor is very good in this matchup between catching the football and getting red zone looks and opportunities. I do think there is something here because I do think if they scout this team properly, the Seattle Seahawks, they will understand that passing against this team is no easy task, and that's something the Bucs are struggling at right now. To be fair, they're struggling to run the football as well, but I do think that they'll at least try to make this work early and put an emphasis on giving Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White, for that matter, some run and opportunity to make plays early in this game. So there you guys have it. To recap, our 5 picks for this week: my running back 16, CPAT at Carolina; my running back 18, D'Onta Foreman at home against Atlanta; my running back 13, Tony Pollard at Green Bay; RB17, Jamaal Williams at Chicago; and RB14, Leonard Fournette versus the Seattle Seahawks at Munich, Germany, an international game for this week. So get up bright and early, you guys. That's going to be a fun contest. At least I'm assuming. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm 99% sure it's going to be an early game, though, which honestly are my least favorites because I like to stay up late on Saturday nights and have a good amount of fun. So waking up is always brutal. I remember when my Packers played the Giants, I was literally half asleep watching that game at 8 in the morning Central Standard Time. So I literally fell asleep for the whole first half of that game, and then at halftime had to like speed rewind through it and have some coffee to wake myself up. So I enjoyed my weeks off of having some international games the past few weeks here, but of course I'm happy for the folks overseas that get to enjoy some football in their home countries, and of course have an appreciation for the game and obviously grow their fandom of football and just kind of spread that seed around the world. So love football, of course, love everyone that loves football, and excited for Week 10 games here. So as always, before we head on out, smash the like button if you enjoyed today's episode. One more time, your questions are welcome as always in the comment section below. Let me know that stuff, and any ways I can help your team here going forward. Don't forget about the community Discord server. We've also got a lot of awesome links in the description of today's episode, so check that stuff out, you guys. Also, I'm about to, right now, record the wide receivers start segment for Week 10, so make sure to check that video out after you're done watching this one, which ends right now. I'll see you there. Peace out.